This whole thing started 11 years ago when I was just 14. And yeah, it still affects me even though I've tried to move past it. My parents divorced when I was 10. Nothing dramatic, they just grew apart or whatever. Dad moved to Arizona for work and sent child support, but wasn't really in the picture much after that. It was just me and Mom for about 3 years. And honestly, those were good years. We were tight, like actually close. She worked as a receptionist at a dental office. We lived in a small apartment. Nothing fancy, but it was fine. Hey everyone, before we dive in, I have a quick favor to ask. If you enjoy content like this, please hit the subscribe button. It's free, supports the channel, and ensures you never miss out on amazing videos. Alright, let's get started. Then she met Evan. At first, he seemed okay, I guess. He had a decent job in sales, drove a nice car, took us out to restaurants Mom could never afford before. But looking back, I can see how he started isolating us almost immediately. First, it was little comments about how our apartment was beneath her potential and how she deserved better. Then it was suggesting she quit her job because he could take care of things. Within 6 months, they were married and we moved into his house in the suburbs. That's when everything changed. Evan started making these jokes about me being a moody teenager whenever I was quiet at dinner. If I didn't immediately jump up to help with dishes, he'd mutter about raising boys, right? Mom would laugh along at first, but soon she was echoing his criticisms. It was like watching someone slowly get brainwashed. The worst part was how he'd wait until Mom wasn't around to say the really messed up stuff. He'd corner me in the hallway and basically tell me I was a burden, that Mom had wasted her prime years raising me instead of finding a real man. He'd go through my room when I was at school and then accuse me of stealing things that were literally mine. When I tried telling Mom, she'd sigh and say I needed to try harder with Evan because he was making sacrifices to raise another man's son. The weekend it happened, we'd gone to Evan's parents' lake house about 4 hours from home. They were just as bad as he was, making comments about my clothes, my hair, how I was scrawny and needed to man up. I basically stayed in the guest room all weekend, playing games on my phone, and only came out when forced to for meals. On the drive back Sunday night, Evan started in about how I had embarrassed him in front of his parents by being antisocial. Mom joined in, saying I was always like this lately. I tried defending myself, saying his parents were the ones being rude to me. And Evan literally reached back from the passenger seat and tried to grab my phone, saying I didn't deserve nice things if I couldn't be grateful. We were yelling back and forth, and I admit, I called him an asshole. That's when Mom completely lost it. She started screaming about how ungrateful I was, how I was ruining her chance at happiness, how she was stuck with me while Dad got to live his life. I had never seen her like this before. It was around 2 a.m. We were on this empty stretch of highway with basically nothing around except this truck stop in the distance. Mom suddenly swerved the car onto the shoulder, slammed the brakes, and turned around screaming, "Get out of my car!" right in my face. I thought she was just trying to scare me, but then she actually got out, came around to my door, and started physically pulling me out of the back seat. I was in complete shock. There was this trucker standing near the guardrail smoking, just watching this whole scene unfold. Mom shoved me toward him, pulled a 20 from her purse, and literally threw it at him, telling him to take me anywhere. She didn't care where. Just make sure I never came back to her house again. Evan was laughing from the passenger seat, saying they were finally getting rid of the dead weight and that trash belongs with trash. The trucker, his name was Timothy, I'll never forget that, looked completely shocked as they just got back in the car and sped away. Left me standing there on the side of the highway at 2 a.m. with a complete stranger. Timothy was basically my guardian angel that night. He was like 50-some, had kids my age, and was horrified by what he'd just seen. He refused to take the money, told me to get in his truck, and drove me to the nearest truck stop, where there were people around. He bought me food while we waited for the police to arrive. He gave them a statement about what he'd witnessed, and gave me his number in case I needed it for the case later. The police took me to a youth shelter that night. I remember sitting in this weird office with fluorescent lights while some social worker tried calling my mom repeatedly. When they finally got her, she told them I was troubled and she couldn't handle me. She refused to come get me. They tried my dad in Arizona but couldn't reach him. Found out later he'd moved again without updating his info. I spent 3 weeks in emergency foster care before they located my mom's brother, my uncle Sitsan. He lived about 2 hours away and had no idea any of this had happened. He came to get me the same day they called him. I remember he took one look at me sitting in that office with my garbage bag of belongings and literally started crying. He hugged me and promised nothing like that would ever happen to me again. Living with Uncle Sasson was basically starting from scratch. New school, new town, no friends. But he was the father figure I never really had. He worked construction but was also this secret math genius who taught me about investing. He never once made me feel like a burden. Mom tried contacting me about a year later when she needed money. Uncle Stisan let me decide if I wanted to talk to her, and I said no. She'd made her choice on that highway and I was done. I didn't know it then, but that night on the highway was going to be the beginning of everything that came after. The next few years were hard, but they led me to where I am today. And last night, well, Last night was when everything came full circle in a way I never could have imagined. I always wondered if I'd ever get the chance to look my mom and Evan in the eyes again and make them understand exactly what they did to me. Turns out, I got something much better than that. Update 1 Holy, I wasn't expecting so many comments and questions on my last post. Kind of overwhelming. TBH, to answer the most common question, yes, I did try to contact my dad after everything went down, but his number was disconnected, and he basically fell off the grid. Uncle Sasan hired someone to track him down about a year later and found out he'd moved to Mexico with some new girlfriend. So, yeah, both parents basically checked out. Cool. Living with Uncle Sasan was an adjustment. His place was this small 2-bedroom house in a working-class neighborhood about 2 hours from where I'd lived with Mom and Evan. The first night there, I literally just sat on the edge of the bed in my room staring at the wall for hours. Like, what do you even do when your entire life implodes? Uncle San was a bachelor who'd never had kids, so he had no clue what to do with a traumatized teenager. But the thing about San is that he's straightforward. That first weekend, he sat me down at his kitchen table and was like, "We need to figure this out together because I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm not abandoning you. We're family." That hit different. After months of Evan making me feel like some burden they were stuck with, having someone actually choose to keep me around was, I don't know, man. It mattered. School was rough at first. Started mid-semester at a new place where everyone already had their friend groups. I was that weird, quiet kid who showed up out of nowhere. The rumors were wild. Heard everything from I was in witness protection to I'd been in juvie. Didn't bother correcting anyone because the truth was worse. Somehow things changed when I joined the track team. Running was basically free therapy. I just put in my earbuds and zoned out for miles. Coach noticed I had decent endurance and encouraged me to stick with it. By sophomore year, I actually had a solid group of friends through track. Not super close, but people to sit with at lunch, which was enough. Uncle Sasan worked construction during the day, but he was low-key obsessed with the stock market and real estate. Every night after dinner, he'd be on his laptop checking his investments, watching videos about market trends, or reading books about financial independence. At first, I thought it was boring as hell, but one night, he showed me how compounding interest works, and my mind was blown, like numbers could actually make you money while you sleep. This was revolutionary info to a 15-year-old kid. I started mowing lawns and doing odd jobs around the neighborhood to save up. Seatson matched whatever I earned and helped me open an investment account when I turned 16. Started small, just a few $100, but watching it grow was addictive. Junior year, something weird happened. Got a friend request on Facebook from my mom. I literally threw my phone across the room when I saw it. Hadn't heard a word from her in almost 2 years, and suddenly she wants to be Facebook friends. I ignored it, but then the text started. Just casual at first. "Hope you're doing well. Miss you. Thinking of you." Then finally what she really wanted. They were having money problems and needed a loan. The audacity. I showed Son the messages and he got so mad he punched a hole in the drywall. Only time I ever saw him lose his. He asked if I wanted to respond and I said, "No, let her wonder. Let her wait for an answer that's never coming." Just like I waited for her to come back for me. Around the same time, I got curious and looked at her profile. All these happy photos of her and Evan on vacations, at restaurants, buying new cars, living their best child-free life while I was rebuilding mine from scratch. That's when I decided I was going to become so successful that one day they'd regret throwing me away like trash. I went hard after that. Kept my grades up, worked every weekend, stayed in shape, saved every dollar I could. Senior year, I got accepted to State University with a partial academic scholarship. Between that, some grants, and the money I'd saved, I could actually afford to go. The summer before college, Son taught me something that changed everything. He'd bought this small rundown house a few streets over for dirt cheap, showed me how to do basic repairs, patching walls, painting, fixing toilets, all that practical stuff. We spent weekends fixing it up. Then he sold it 3 months later for almost double what he paid. My mind was blown. You could literally buy garbage, make it less garbage, and people would pay you more money for it. College was a grind. Double majored in finance and real estate. Worked part-time at the campus bookstore and waited tables on weekends. Shared a crappy apartment with 3 other guys to save money. Every spare dollar went into my investment account. Sophomore year, I found this online forum about real estate investing and basically became obsessed. Junior year, I took the plunge. Found this absolute dump of a condo near campus, water damage, disgusting carpet, kitchen from 1972. Owner was desperate to sell because he'd moved out of state. Got a small loan from the bank with Season as my co-signer. Bought it for next to nothing. Spent winter break living there and fixing it up with skills I'd learned from Season. Sold it 4 months later and made enough profit to buy 2 more places. By senior year, I had a system going. Find distressed property, fix the worst problem, sell for profit, repeat. Wasn't making millions or anything, but I was building something real while most of my classmates were accumulating debt. One night during finals week, I was grabbing coffee at this 24-hour place near campus. Overheard these 2 guys at the next table talking about a commercial property downtown that was going into foreclosure. One mentioned the owner had gambling problems and the bank was taking the building. Something about the situation sounded familiar, so I eavesdropped harder. Then I heard them mention the owner's name, Evan. What are the odds? I nearly spilled coffee all over myself. Asked the guys if they were talking about Evan, and they were like, "Yeah, you know him." I said he was my stepdad, and they gave me this weird look. One of them said Evan had been telling everyone his stepson was in med school, and they were helping pay his tuition. I literally laughed in their faces. Hadn't spoken to him or my mom in 7 years at that point. Got back to my apartment and went down the social media rabbit hole. Mom's profile was now private, but I could still see Evan's. The facade was cracking. Fewer vacation photos, more vague posts about life's challenges, and staying positive through adversity. Someone in the comments mentioned being sorry about his job situation, so things weren't so perfect after all. Called Uncle Setsan that night and told him what I'd discovered. He wasn't surprised. Said he'd heard through family that Evan had been fired from his sales job about a year earlier for ethical violations, probably stealing, and had bounced between positions since then. Mom was working retail part-time, but they were basically living on credit cards and home equity loans. The big house in the suburbs was mortgaged to the hilt. That's when the idea first hit me. Not fully formed yet, but the seed of it. What if I could buy their debt? What if I could own the financial noose they'd put around their own necks? What if I could be the one to decide their fate, just like they decided mine that night on the highway? Graduation came and went, got job offers but turned them down. Started my own small real estate investment company instead with the capital I'd built up, focused on distressed properties. The more desperate the seller, the better the deal. I was playing the long game now, building resources, connections, knowledge. The whole time I kept tabs on Mom and Evan through relatives and social media. Watched as their situation got worse. Watched as they started selling belongings to stay afloat, all while pretending to everyone that things were fine. I didn't know exactly how or when, but I knew someday our paths would cross again. And when they did, I'd be ready. The kid they threw away like trash on the side of the highway wouldn't be a kid anymore. And that day was coming sooner than I thought. Update 2. Someone asked if I ever tried to contact Timothy the trucker again. Yeah, I actually stayed in touch with him on and off over the years. He's the one decent adult who stepped up that night, so we grab lunch whenever he's passing through. More on that later. After graduation, I rented this tiny office space in a strip mall. Literally just me, a desk, and a laptop. Started cold calling banks about foreclosure properties and distressed sales. It was brutal at first, like imagine making 50 calls a day and getting hung up on 49 times. But eventually I built a reputation as someone who could close deals fast with cash. Over the next 2 years, I scaled up, hired an assistant, started dealing with bigger properties, small apartment buildings, commercial spaces, that kind of thing. Had a few deals go sideways and lost money, but way more successes than failures. Nothing crazy, just steady growth. The whole time I kept tabs on Mom and Evan through extended family. My cousin Lillian worked at the same mall as my mom and would text me updates sometimes. Apparently, Mom was working at this makeup counter and acting like everything was fine. But Lillian noticed she wore the same 3 outfits to work every week and brought lunch in reused grocery bags. Meanwhile, Evan was supposedly consulting, but everyone knew he couldn't hold down a real job anymore. So, I'm at my office one random Tuesday, scrolling through the county's pre-foreclosure listings, public record bitabu, when I see a familiar address. I literally had to do a double take. It was their house, the suburban McMansion, Evan was so proud of, listed as being 90 days behind on mortgage payments. I swear my heart started racing. This wasn't part of some master plan, it was just a random coincidence. But it felt like IDK, like the universe was handing me something. I immediately called my contact at the bank that held the mortgage and asked for details, pretending it was just another potential investment. What I learned blew my mind. They hadn't just missed a few payments. They'd refinanced the house 3 times in 7 years, pulling out equity each time. The current mortgage was almost double the original loan amount. They'd been on a payment plan but had fallen behind again. The bank was giving them 1 more month before starting formal foreclosure proceedings. I hung up and just sat there staring at my computer screen. This was it. This was my chance. But I needed to be smart about it. That night, I called Uncle Setsan and laid it all out. He was quiet for a long time, then asked if getting revenge would actually make me feel better. I told him honestly that I didn't know, but I needed to find out. He said he understood, but warned me not to do anything illegal. I promised I wouldn't. Everything would be above board, just strategically timed. First step, I created a separate LLC specifically for this project. Gave it a generic name that couldn't be traced back to me easily. This company would be the one to officially buy the debt and handle all communications. I wasn't hiding exactly, just creating a buffer. Then I reached out to the bank again through my LLC and made an offer to buy the mortgage at a discount since it was distressed. This is totally normal in real estate. Banks often sell bad loans rather than deal with lengthy foreclosures. After some negotiation, they accepted, but that was just the beginning. Once I started digging into their financial situation, I realized the mortgage was just the tip of the iceberg. Credit card debt, personal loans, even a second mortgage they had taken out with another bank. They owed money everywhere. So I started buying it all, one debt at a time. Credit cards, personal loans, everything I could get my hands on. Some debts I bought directly, others I had to work through debt collection agencies. It took almost 6 months and a significant chunk of my business capital. But eventually, I owned basically all of their debt. Every bill they paid was going to companies I controlled. And I wasn't doing anything sketchy with the debt, charging the same interest, keeping the same payment schedules. I just waited, watched as they made minimum payments, juggling one bill to pay another. All the while, my LLC was the silent owner of their financial nightmare. The really crazy part, I found out through family that they'd been bragging about helping me, telling everyone how they were paying for my education, helping with my business, being so supportive. Meanwhile, I hadn't spoken to them in literally years. And they had no clue I was the one now holding all their debts. Uncle's son thought this was the most effed up part. He actually got angry at a family barbecue when someone mentioned how generous my mom and Evan were being. He set the record straight real quick. Told everyone I'd put myself through college while working multiple jobs, built my business on my own, and hadn't received a dime from them since I was 14. The family gossip chain did its thing after that. Around this time, I got a weird email from my mom. Super casual, like we just talked last week, asking how I was doing and saying she'd love to reconnect. No mention of the fact that, she abandoned me on a highway. I didn't respond, but I noticed the timing coincided with them missing a mortgage payment. Funny how they only remembered they had a son when they needed something. Then came Thanksgiving. I usually spend holidays with Uncle's son, but that year he convinced me to come to the extended family dinner at my great-aunt's house. I was nervous about it since I knew Mom and Evan might be there, but Sason promised he'd have my back. Sure enough, they showed up. First time I'd seen them in person since that night. Mom looked older, worn down. Evan had gained weight and lost most of his hair. When they saw me, they both froze for a second. Then Mom rushed over like we were long-lost friends trying to hug me. I stepped back and just stared at her until she dropped her arms. The whole dinner was this bizarre performance. They kept trying to bring up, when Dylan was living with us, stories like everything had been normal. At one point, Evan actually had the balls to say something about helping with college expenses. I just looked him dead in the eyes and said, I paid my own way, every cent. Mom jumped in saying they'd always been there for me in their hearts, and how family helps family. That's when I lost it. I stood up and told everyone exactly what happened that night on the highway, how they threw me away like garbage, how I spent time in foster care, how they refused to take me back. The whole table went silent. Evan tried to claim I was exaggerating, that I'd run away and they'd looked everywhere for me. I pulled out my phone, called Timothy the trucker, and put him on speaker, asked him to tell everyone what he saw that night. You could hear a pin drop as Timothy described watching my mother physically push me out of the car, throw money at him, and speed away. Mom started crying, saying she'd been in a bad place back then. Evan just got angry, saying I was trying to embarrass them, and that I should be grateful they put a roof over my head for years. I looked around the table at all these family members who'd believed their lies and said that roof came with a price, being treated like garbage daily, and then thrown away when I wasn't convenient anymore. Then I dropped the bomb. Told them I knew they were broke, house in pre-foreclosure, drowning in debt. Evan turned white, demanded to know how I knew that. I just smiled and walked out. That night, my phone blew up with texts from Mom, alternating between apologizing and asking if I could help them out with their financial situation. I blocked her number through my LLC. I started sending them official notices about their various debts. Nothing harassing, just standard paperwork, payment reminders, statements, the usual stuff creditors send. But I made sure they all arrived on the same day each month. A monthly reminder that the walls were closing in. I also gradually increased the minimum payments. Nothing illegal, just exercising options that were in the original loan agreements. Clauses that let the lender require higher payments after missed deadlines. Stuff most banks don't bother with because it's too much hassle, but for me, worth every second. Christmas came and went. No word from them except more desperate texts to my block number. Then in January, I saw they'd listed the house for sale, way above market value. It sat there with no offers for weeks. They lowered the price, then lowered it again. Still nothing. I decided to turn the screws a little tighter. Had my LLC send formal default notices on 2 of their credit cards, completely legitimate. They were 60 days past due. This triggered default interest rates on their other cards too. Their monthly payments basically doubled overnight. February, March, April. I watched through public records as they tried everything to stay afloat. They took out a payday loan, which I promptly bought. They tried to get a home equity line of credit, denied due to existing liens. Evan even tried starting a GoFundMe claiming medical expenses, but it only raised a few $100. By May, they'd missed 3 consecutive mortgage payments. Legally, I could start foreclosure proceedings, but I waited, calculated exactly how long the process would take in our state. I wanted the final notice, the one telling them they'd be evicted, to arrive on a very specific date, the anniversary of the night they abandoned me. I filed the paperwork exactly 45 days before that date. Everything by the book, court approvals, certified letters, the works. The system moves slowly but precisely. The final eviction notice would be delivered exactly 11 years to the day after they left me on that highway. As the date approached, I made one more call to Timothy, told him what was happening, and asked if he wanted to be there for the finale. He didn't hesitate, said he'd rearrange his driving schedule to make it happen. The night before the big day, I barely slept, not from guilt or doubt, but from anticipation. Everything was in place. Tomorrow, at almost the exact hour they abandoned me, their world would come crashing down and they wouldn't even know I was the one holding the sledgehammer. Final update. To answer the most common question, no, I don't feel bad about what I did. Not even a little bit. You'll see why. So the day finally arrived. 11 years to the day since I was abandoned on that highway. I took the day off work, which was weird because I didn't actually have anything to do until later. Just kind of sat around my apartment checking my phone every 5 minutes, weirdly anxious. Timothy texted that he was in town staying at a hotel near the courthouse. We agreed to meet for dinner before heading over to my mom and Evan's place for the main event. The eviction notice had been delivered 3 days earlier. According to the legal paperwork, they had until midnight to vacate the property, or the sheriff would remove them the following morning. I knew they had nowhere to go. They'd burned bridges with most family members by borrowing money they never repaid, and their credit was so trash they couldn't even rent a decent apartment. Around 6 p.m., I met Timothy at the steakhouse near his hotel. Hadn't seen him in person for almost a year, but he looked the same. Big guy with a gray beard and those trucker cap tan lines on his forehead. We ordered food and caught up on life stuff. His oldest kid just had a baby, making him a grandfather. I showed him pictures of the office building I just bought downtown. As we were finishing dinner, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was my mom, saying they just found out who was behind the foreclosure. My LLC's name was on all the paperwork and asking if we could talk. I showed Timothy and he just shook his head. I didn't respond. Let them stew in it a little longer. After dinner, Timothy and I drove separately to a coffee shop about a block from their house. The plan was to wait there until around 1:30 a.m., then drive by to see if they'd actually left the property. I wasn't expecting any big confrontation, just wanted to see with my own eyes that they were gone, that the revenge was complete. We sat there for hours talking about life and drinking too much coffee. Timothy told me about the night he found me, how he couldn't sleep for days afterward, how he'd called the police station repeatedly to check on me until they basically told him to stop. Said he'd thought about me off and on for years before I tracked him down through the trucking company after I turned 18. Around midnight, my phone started blowing up. First, just texts from unknown numbers. They kept getting new phones because they couldn't pay their bills. Then actual calls. I ignored all of it. Then a voicemail notification popped up. Out of curiosity, I played it on speaker. It was my mom, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her, saying they had nowhere to go, that they were going to be sleeping in their car, that they were sorry for everything. In the background, I could hear Evan yelling that they should just break into the house and refuse to leave, that the creditors couldn't just throw them out like garbage. The irony was chef's kiss. By 1 a.m., my phone was literally blowing up nonstop. The count of missed calls and texts kept climbing. 20, 50, 76. I put my phone on silent and just watched the notifications roll in. Timothy looked at me and asked if I was okay. I honestly didn't know what to say. It wasn't satisfaction exactly, more like confirmation. Like, yes, this is exactly what I wanted to happen. But now that it's here, it feels weirdly empty. Then came the text that changed everything. My mom again, from yet another new number. We just found out your company owns all our debt. Please, Dylan, we're begging you. We'll be on the streets by morning. You're our only hope. And that's when I knew what I needed to do. I showed Timothy the text, then typed out my response. Trash belongs with trash. Don't ever darken my doorstep again. Timothy nodded his approval. I hit send, then immediately turned off my phone. We drove over to the house around 1:45 a.m. Their car was still in the driveway, piled high with boxes and random stuff. Lights were on inside. I parked across the street and just watched for a while. Timothy parked behind me and waited in his truck. Around 2 a.m., exactly the time they'd abandoned me all those years ago, I decided to approach the house. Not sure what I expected, but I needed to see their faces. Timothy got out of his truck and walked with me, a silent support system. I knocked on the door, waited, knocked again, harder. Finally, Evan yanked it open, looking like absolute, red-eyed, unshaven, wearing a stained t-shirt. When he saw me, his mouth literally fell open. Then he saw Timothy behind me, and I swear he turned white as a sheet. He started with the fake nice act, saying how good it was to see me, asking if I'd gotten their messages. Then Mom appeared behind him, eyes puffy from crying. She pushed past Evan and tried to hug me. I stepped back, keeping my distance. They both started talking at once, apologizing, making excuses, begging for help. I just stood there silently, letting them dig themselves deeper. Finally, when they ran out of breath, I spoke. I asked them if they remembered what happened exactly 11 years ago today. Mom looked confused for a second. Then her face changed as it dawned on her. Evan tried to brush it off, saying that was all in the past, that they'd been going through a rough patch back then. That's when Timothy spoke up, reminded them exactly what they'd done. How they'd thrown a 14-year-old kid away like garbage. How my mom had physically shoved me out of the car. How Evan had laughed as they drove away. How they'd left me with a complete stranger at 2 a.m. on a deserted highway. Mom started crying again, saying she'd been manipulated by Evan, that she regretted it every day. Evan got defensive, claiming I was impossible to live with, that I'd been disrespectful, that they'd done their best. I just laughed. Told them I wasn't there to hear excuses. I was there to tell them that yes, my company owned all their debt. Yes, I was the one foreclosing on their house. And yes, they had exactly 10 hours to get out before the sheriff arrived to physically remove them. Evan completely lost it. Started screaming that I couldn't do this to them, that it was illegal, that they'd sue me. He actually tried to grab me, but Timothy stepped between us. Mom was just sobbing, repeating, please, over and over. That's when I pulled out a folder with some papers inside. Told my mom that I was willing to offer her, and only her, a one-bedroom apartment in a building I owned across town. First 6 months rent-free, then below-market rent after that. The catch, Evan couldn't live there or even visit. She'd have to leave him. The look on Evan's face was priceless. He started yelling that she wouldn't do it, that she'd never leave him. Mom just stood there, looking back and forth between us, completely torn. I told her she had 10 minutes to decide. If she wanted the apartment, she could pack a bag and come with me right now. Otherwise, they were both on their own. Those 10 minutes were the longest of my life. Evan alternated between threatening me and trying to convince Mom that I was bluffing. Mom kept asking if there was another option, some way they could both stay together. I just repeated the terms, her alone or nothing. In the end, she chose him. Said they'd been together for 11 years and she couldn't abandon him now. The irony of her using the word abandon wasn't lost on me. I nodded, put the folder back in my pocket and turned to leave. Mom grabbed my arm, begging me to reconsider. I looked her in the eyes and said the exact words Evan had said to me that night. Trash belongs with trash. Timothy and I walked back to our cars without looking back. I could hear Mom crying and Evan cursing from the doorway, but I didn't turn around. It was done. The next morning, the sheriff arrived on schedule. They were still in the house, still hoping for a last-minute miracle. They were escorted out with what they could carry. The rest of their belongings would be moved to the curb for 24 hours, then disposed of. I watched from down the street as they loaded their car with whatever would fit. According to my cousin Lillian, they ended up at this run-down extended stay motel on the edge of town. Evan's been telling people they're between homes while they look for a new place, but everyone knows the truth now. As for the house, I bought it at the foreclosure auction for well below market value. Could have flipped it for a quick profit, but I had a better idea. I'm converting it into transitional housing for teens from broken homes. Timothy's daughter Maxine, who works with at-risk youth, is helping me set it up. The first residents move in next month. I still don't know if what I did was right in some grand moral sense, but it feels like justice. They threw away a child who needed them, and 11 years later, that child took away the home they needed. Perfect symmetry. Uncle Satsan came over for dinner last night, asked if I felt better now that it was done. I told him I didn't feel better, exactly. The scars from that night will always be there, but I felt complete, like a circle that needed to be closed finally was. I still have the $20 bill my mom threw at Timothy that night. He gave it to me years ago, said he'd kept it as evidence in case he ever needed to testify. I'm having it framed along with a picture of the house now that it's been renovated for the youth program. Going to hang it in my office as a reminder that sometimes the kid who gets thrown away like trash ends up being the one who takes out the garbage. And that's the end of my story.